Well, folks, just recently issued from the National Weather Service out of Tallahassee, a tornado warning, and actually coming from a waterspout feature that's just off the coastline of Tyndall right now, in association with some of these showers and thunderstorms that we've been watching work their way on through the panhandle here. Let's zoom in on the panhandle, zoom in on the warning itself. You'll notice it in southeastern portions of Bay County here right now. It's associated with a cell that's just off the coastline trying to move its way onto 98 and Tyndall Parkway that runs down southeast there into Bay County. But nonetheless, tornado warning has been issued for a waterspout feature that's very weak in nature, trying to move its way up onto the coastline. You'd have to have a beach chair right on the sandy shores to have probably an issue with what they issued here for this little system that's working its way on through. Again, nothing major, but maybe just a weak little waterspout that's trying to move its way up onto the coastline here in this general vicinity. But what we wanted you to do is go ahead, and if you're in the area of Tyndall or around Tyndall Parkway down in southeastern Bay County, go ahead and find that safe place in your households right now and take shelter. I'm sure that the base has gone ahead and issued their tornado warnings for this cell system as it's working its way on through. Here's the latest look at radar. You can see the broken batch of rain that we've been dealing with here in the panhandle so far this morning. Now, just as of the last hour, some of the features of showers and thunderstorms and some small cells have been showing some small signs of rotation out into the Gulf of Mexico. And that's been the case here for this little cell that's working its way right up onto the coastline. What I'm going to do is bring up my tools, and we're going to stop our loop so you can get an idea of where that cell is actually located. And you can almost see just a little bit of a notch that's formed right on the back side of this cell. Kind of indicates that we've got a little bit of rotation happening with this cell just by looking at the storm structure. Again, we're just off the coast of Tyndall Parkway, just off the coast of Tyndall right now, out into the Gulf with a tornado-warned cell for a maybe weak waterspout structure that's on the back end of this cell here that's working its way up on towards the coastline. I'll back out just a hair so you can actually see the coast. There's the coast itself, and we're not far away from the coastline right now. The feature itself may be just about 2 or 3 miles off the coastline down towards the southwest, and the cell itself is moving toward the northeast. So we're looking down towards the Tyndall region of the coastline, pretty close to Crooked Island in that general vicinity, where we need to go ahead and start thinking about finding our safe zones. There's not a whole lot there other than the base, and the base, I'm sure, is aware of this cell as well, and they'll be taking their necessary precautions to go ahead and shelter in place and let this little cell move its way through. The tornado warning itself lasts till 12:15 and is now 11:50 this morning. So we'll stay with this cell until it falls apart on the coastline, which will most likely be the case here for most of these cells that we've seen out into the Gulf. They haven't even made it close to the coastline. They've been falling apart that fast. Our atmosphere has been primed for some rotation to be expected today for an isolated storm or two, but we don't have necessarily all the right ingredients working together to get long form, big, powerful tornadoes. What we're talking about here is just a weak little water spout that's trying to move its way up onto the coastline. But nonetheless, there's some pretty heavy rains going on here, and we need to go ahead and still shelter in place for what could be about 40, 50-mile-an-hour winds associated with this cell as it tries to move its way up onto the coastline. That most certainly can cause some debris outside to maybe fly around or any loose impediments to be picked up. There's the latest storm scan, and we've seen it now actually move its way up onto the coastline. It's this little nose out of the storm cell, this little bulge on the back side of it, that we've seen the potential for some rotation involved in this storm cell itself. So it's now moving it up onto the coastline right around the Crooked Island region in southeastern portions of Bay County, again near the Tyndall Air Force Base region is where we're watching for this storm cell to move its way up onto the coastline. What I'm going to do is I'm going to flip over to our velocity signature here and see just what kind of rotation we're actually talking about. And You know, it's pretty washed out even already at this point in time. As I mentioned before, it was looking really weak on radar as it was trying to work its way on through. Doesn't appear to be too much rotation associated with it, but you still see some brighter shades of green. And if you look on our scale here at the top, your legend, this is an indication of wind speeds in the atmosphere when we bring up velocity signatures. So the radar scan's actually up towards Freeport and Red Bay, out into eastern Walton County, just off towards the top left side of your screen. You can occasionally see the radar scan come on through. Now, the greens that we've got are indicating that we've got winds in the atmosphere actually going toward that radar scan. And the faster and the brighter that those greens get, that's the faster that the winds are. The more dull that green is and to where it starts to change over into maybe a little bit of a gray, that's the more weaker that those winds are associated. So there could be some pretty gusty winds right now occurring across 98. I don't see anything that looks like it's rotating. In that instance, you would see almost a couplet where there's some very bright greens mixed right up next to maybe some very dark or bright reds, indicating that you'd have winds that are actually moving in opposite directions right next to each other, or what we would refer to as a couplet, to where there's rotation in the atmosphere, to where you might be seeing the potential of some rotation. But again, this is issued by the National Weather Service out of Tallahassee. It was looking like a weak little water spout that was going to try to move its way up on towards the coastline, and they just snap-triggered a tornado warning there for the coast to watch this storm cell work its way up onto the coast. But it's already looked like fairly washed out in nature here at this point in time. Maybe just some gusty winds trying to move their way up on toward the Air Force Base right now. Let's flip back over toward radar scans here, and we'll see what happens with the next scan. The storm structure itself still containing some fairly heavy rains down across the base and across southeastern portions of Bay County. Those indicated to you by some of the reds that we're seeing on radar. And the storm structure itself is still actually rather interesting, just by looking at reflectivity here for us. Now, what I'll show you is the way that those winds are actually moving and creating the storm structure. So when you have a pretty strong cell, it's actually pulling in winds and moisture. So you've got rear flank inflow coming into the storm cell, and then you'll eventually start to see some form on the inside of the storm cell, and that's almost kind of giving it that little bowing nature right there. The winds from that point in time can start to wrap up a little bit into the storm cell and start to fan out, and that's where you start to get a little bit more of the rain shield occurring like that. But it's where those winds actually start to come together in this general vicinity is where do we start to see the potential of rotation in the atmosphere. And that's just looking at the storm structure itself. When we brought in velocity, you can see that it was very weak if there was going to be any sort of rotation involved in this storm cell itself. But nonetheless, the storm structure still would support the potential for maybe some mid-level rotation that's probably trying to reach down to the ground, as maybe it was a weak little water spout, and then it started to move closer to the coastline. We started to interact with the friction of the land, and sometimes that can disrupt the rotating system, and so all of a sudden it starts to lift up off the ground, and that tends to be what the case is when it comes to these water spouts as they start to move up off the Gulf and move on to the coastline. They tend to fall apart. But certainly interesting storm structure still with this cell itself, but not necessarily looking at anything that is severely rotating here right now. And if we were to see anything actually here for today, it'd be kind of this nature, where you're going to get brief, maybe little spin-ups to occur in some of the strongest storm cells, which will only be about a handful across the Panhandle all the way up into Alabama today. But certainly is the case here for us as we work our way into the daytime today. So there's the latest scan. Let's go back over toward radar. I'm going to back out just a little bit. Let's see if that storm structure still looks a little bit like we're dealing with the potential for some rotation. The storm structure itself is not terrible, but not looking as pronounced with the hook basically on the back end of it that we were seeing. Now, again, tornado warning has been issued for this storm system, this little cell, until 12:15 Central Time, and it is now 11:55. Rotation does not look as potent, and it wasn't all that much when it was in the Gulf, but that certainly has waned as it's worked its way on through. The National Weather Service may be just allowing this to run its course and go all the way into that 12-15 time frame and just let this storm cell just kind of flare out and finish up. But those folks down towards Tyndall, I'm sure, have already had the warning, and they've already worked their way into their safe places on base. Now let's find out maybe what's ahead of it as we cross over the east side of the bay. We're going to pan just a little bit up towards the northeast because we've got 22 that stretches further off towards the east here into eastern portions of Bay County. And we're going to be running generally into that Star Avenue area as well, off towards the east side there of Bay County. But those would be the general regions right now that we want to think about going ahead and just finding our safe zones. Down 22 in Bay County, as we've got a storm cell that's just to your southwest, probably not going to reach all the way up to Highway 22, as interaction with the land, typically with a waterspout feature, doesn't tend to last very long. There is a decent sliver of the bay out here into eastern portions and southeastern portions of Bay County, to where we could possibly see that frictionless environment of the surface over the bay waters try to reignite this and maybe give it just a little rotation again as it tries to move its way up towards the north side of the East Bay. But in general, it's not looking very healthy for this cell when it works its way up through. Looks like they've trimmed off the backside of the cell itself. They've trimmed the polygon, very much have narrowed the polygon to where we've been talking about seeing the potential for rotation in the atmosphere with this storm cell. That what we call the bear cage, the red polygon tornado warned segment of the cell has been very much trimmed down from what the National Weather Service initially put out. I think they're seeing the same thing we are, that it's starting to weaken just a little bit, but they're probably going to watch and see how it interacts with the bay waters before they go ahead and continue to cancel the storm cell. Let's switch back over to velocity. Again, velocity is sampling of the winds in the atmosphere here for us. And well, for the most part, we're just looking at kind of uniform winds. And uniform in the green, meaning that we're moving, we have winds in the atmosphere, so moving toward that radar scan that just went by. We don't see any reds mixed in there to give us a couplet or to show us that there's winds going in the opposite direction either. So we're kind of just looking at a pretty good windy, gusty storm cell that's moving its way through. And that was also to be one of the concerns that we had with some of the strongest storms to move through, the potential for seeing some gusty, maybe damaging winds. 40 to 50 miles per hour can be enough to maybe throw around that trash bin out onto the roadway. If it's trash day for you, it's trash day in my neighborhood. But nonetheless, this storm cell will still carry a little bit of a punch when it comes to some straight line winds, even if they're not rotating. And so that can also be one of the reasons why the National Weather Service is going ahead and hanging on to this tornado warned cell. But it's working its way into the East Bay right now, just trying to move off of Tyndall. We got to stay with it here, as it could start to interact with some of 22 in the next 10 or 15 minutes as it tries to cross over the bay. Interaction with the frictionless water of the bay can also allow those winds to try to rotate again at the surface, because right now we're probably just looking at maybe a few thousand feet up in the atmosphere. We're starting to still see some rotation there on radar, but maybe not necessarily all the way down just here at this point in time, as waterspouts tend to have struggles once they start to interact with the land. The friction of the land, the trees, that can all disrupt the way that the wind flows at the base of what can be a developing storm cell that's trying to produce a tornado. And so as waterspouts tend to move their way onto the coastline, we'll say interaction with the land, the friction, that can sometimes be the detriment of them. But with our unique coastline and with our unique bays that we have on the coast, those can always act like little skipping pads for the storm cell. So we've seen several instances of that happen before over toward Panama City Beach just recently in years, where we've had a waterspout move its way up onto the coastline, actually skip up over Grand Lagoon, pop right back into St. Andrews Bay, and then try to spin up again into a waterspout that moves its way right up onto Panama City. And so certainly that can most certainly be the case here sometimes. All right, so we're getting really strung out now on velocity when it comes to the banding features that we've seen with velocity signatures coming through, and really not getting any signs of significant rotation anymore with this. Pretty strung out even looking now. It looks like some of those straight line winds are really starting to stretch this storm cell out some. But we still do have just a little bit of a hook on the backside of it on storm structure, looks like right now, and reflectivity. Reflectivity is basically the cell itself and where the heavy rains are, and that can give you an idea of the storm's structure. And looking at the storm structure right now, sometimes you can infer rotation that we're seeing in the atmosphere. And again, as we were talking about, you can sometimes get winds to work their way in on the backside of a storm cell. And then we've got pretty powerful south winds that are moving into the storm cell as well. Just in general, our winds today are out of the south. But when a cell starts to take shape, it pulls moisture and it pulls conditions off the ground. We need rising motion to create showers and thunderstorms. You can't just create a vacuum at the surface by creating rising motion in the atmosphere to get the storm. So you got to pull that air in from somewhere. And the way it comes in is on the backside of the storm system, the rear flank downdraft, and then you've also got the inflow coming in from the south with just our general winds, and that can set the stage for some rotation. So we're still looking at the potential that the storm cell has rotation in the atmosphere, and it'd be in that general region, which if I zoom in right now, we're just starting to cross over the bay, and we're just looking east of Parker right now. We're looking east of 98 right now, and the storm cell is still working its way off towards the northeast. Again, I'm not overly concerned with anything powerful when it comes to the storm cell, but it could be whipping up some winds right now in a little bit of a frenzy, maybe just east of Parker up into the West Bay, or excuse me, the East Bay region here for us as it's trying to move its way a little further north towards 98. Zoom in just a little bit more so at street level here, and we've got some areas of concern for Albert Meadow, Benton Drive, South Berth Avenue, Plantation Drive. Some of these locations here is where we're seeing some of the nastiest of the effects right now. We need to make sure that we are hunkered down in this neighborhood here on the eastern side of the bay. Now, the storm cell itself is going to continue to kind of work on an east-northeast track, and so that could take it, as I've been mentioning, up toward Highway 22. And of course, that's starting to get a little close to Callaway now. We're east of Parker with this storm cell, trying to move its way on a northeasterly, east-northeasterly track. And that general vicinity is where we're looking here for the potential of seeing some gusty winds as this storm cell moves its way on through. So here's Callaway, almost right in the middle of your screen. The cell is just to your south right now, and it looks like, well, it's probably pretty close to maybe even at this point in time being right on top of Callaway, or at least moving right up toward Highway 22. You got to keep in mind that when these radar scans come through, they sit and we wait about another 4, 5, 6, 7 minutes before the next one comes through. And so I think this last one just came on by at about 12:01 or 12:02, so 2 or 3 minutes ago. Then you got to imagine that the storm cell has already shifted just a little bit further towards the north. So areas in Callaway, we need to go ahead and find our safe places, which would be in the central area of your homes. You want to get away from windows and doors. Again, this isn't a powerful tornadic cell by any means, but we are seeing some gusty winds associated with it of about 40 to 50 miles per hour, and that's still enough to maybe kick some things around that are loose outside of your home, which could cause some damage. But in general, it's looking like it's working its way further off towards the northeast in a weakening stage. And so I don't think that we're going to end up seeing too much, if any, damage with this cell as it works its way on through. This was an old waterspout looking cell off into the Gulf. that's tried to move its way up onto the coastline. And in those situations, we tend to see them weaken fairly quickly. It's 12:05 right now. There's 10 minutes left on this tornado warning as it continues to move its way towards the northeast. Notice on this last radar scan that we just got in here at 12:05 that we've lost a lot of the deeper reds in association with this little hook that we've got on the backside of the storm cell. That indicating right there that we've lost a lot of lift. We're no longer creating the real heavy showers and thunderstorms. You can see where that is occurring right now, up a little bit more so to the north side of Highway 22. Let me zoom out just a little bit more so. So our storm structure is still kind of there, but we've kind of lost some of the lift, probably with interaction from the land. A little bit of that disrupting some of the wind flow. Now we've disrupted some of the uptake into this storm cell, and so now we're starting to see it further collapse just a little bit more so. You're watching the stages basically of the storm kind of fan out and wash out as it's working its way further towards the northeast. But there's still just a little bright banding going on velocity. Again, velocity is a way to measure the winds. We see how things are moving in the atmosphere, and we can garner just how fast things are going and which direction they're moving. The greens indicating that the winds actually in this storm cell are moving more toward the radar scan, which is over toward Red Bay. We don't see any kind of reds showing up. Reds would mean that winds are moving away from the storm, or excuse me, from the radar scan within the storm. And that would indicate that you would have rotation or some sort of structure that's possibly giving us rotation. But we've got just kind of uniform greens right now with some pockets of brighter greens showing up, indicating that there's still some pretty strong winds trying to move their way across 22 right now, east of Callaway, and moving off towards the east and northeast direction for us with this storm cell. But I don't see any significant signs of rotation here on velocity, which is good news in that regard. We still have a decent storm structure with this storm cell. There's still some inflow occurring into the storm cell, and that's getting wrapped up into the storm itself. And then as we're wrapped up into the storm cell, the air continues to rise, then you start to see it fan out as upper level winds start to bring us our rain shield, which actually extends off towards the east. So that's why you're getting some heavy rains down 22 right now. But there's still potential that we've got some rotation occurring in the atmosphere east of Callaway and trying to cross Highway 22 with just looking at the storm structure itself. But I don't think that we have anything by any means on the strong side. And I imagine as we start to move towards 12:15 here, we're going to see the National Weather Service go ahead and allow this to expire. I doubt that they'll continue on further off towards the east or the northeast with this storm cell itself. I think we'll actually see the tornado warning expire. But if you're on 22, if we're in eastern portions of Bay County right now, there is a weak signature on radar that's indicating maybe some possible strong or damaging winds trying to move their way through. This is east of Callaway down 22. So if we're in that location right now, of course, you can already tell that it's coming down pretty good outside, but we need to go ahead and hunker down and wait for this storm cell to continue to stretch its way out and start to fall apart further. And we'll see this storm cell just kind of wash itself out, turn into a benign shower as it continues to progress its way off towards Calhoun County, just to the northeast there. But for the most part, we're looking at some pretty heavy rains and some gusty winds occurring with this storm cell right now. And if you're just tuning in with us and you're looking at my scribbly lines, I was drawing our storm structure to show you how we have the possibility of seeing some rotation with this storm cell, and one of the reasons why we have a tornado warning issued on the storm cell itself. I'm going to back out just a little bit, as there were a couple other Gulf cells not long ago further back towards the west, and it looks like even over towards Panama City Beach right now, you can see the very light shades of green, that those are just some lighter showers. I'm going to stretch just a little further, though, back towards the west, as we still have potential of seeing some showers and thunderstorms to move through as our cold front's still back towards the west. There was a marine warning on the storm cell that's moving through off the coast now of or excuse me, on the coastline right now of, well, what appears to be South Walton, trying to move its way towards, looks like up into Freeport region, maybe toward 331 here. Some heavy rains. Maybe they had some small rotation with that cell, but never quite managed to get to anything that was overly concerning. We still have our tornado-warned cell here in eastern portions of Bay County. Let me back out just a little bit more. That's even looking rougher now. We're starting to cut off that little tail end of it. But in our eastern portions of Bay County is where we're still just under a little bit of concern for some maybe gusty, damaging winds with this storm cell. It's 12:11 right now. 12:15 is our tornado warning cutoff time. I doubt we'll see the National Weather Service reissue on this cell, but if you are in eastern portions of Bay County, if you're southeast of Highway 231, around Highway 22, let's go ahead and just kind of hunker down for the next 30 minutes or so, wait for the storm cell itself completely to wash itself out as it continues to try to drift off towards Calhoun County. There are some heavier cells up 231, but we're not looking at any rotation in that one west of Bluntstown, east of Highway 231. The only cell that we're really concerned with was one that actually moved its way up off the coastline. If I put this into play, you're going to kind of see the storm cell itself work its way up off the coastline and try to move its way up. There we go. Now we're playing. You'll see it move its way right up off the Gulf onto the coast. And it was in those early stages there when it was off the coastline that we were over a more frictionless environment of the water that was allowing the storm system to freely try to rotate. But as it started to move its way up onto the coastline, an interaction with the land and the trees can disrupt some of that low-level flow, and then all of a sudden you start to disrupt the uptake into the storm cell itself, and we start to see it start to fan out just a little bit more so. So the storm cell itself, again, is moving its way onto Highway 22 east of Callaway. We're southeast of Highway 231. There's Highland Park on the left side of your screen there on 231. There's 719. We are east of that. We're north of Highway 22, and we're looking at kind of a elongated structure now with this shower and thunderstorm complex, which doesn't appear to be anything that's overly concerning outside of maybe some heavy rains and some gusty winds. But the tornado warning itself's got maybe about another minute and a half, and we'll stick with it and allow it to expire, and then we'll get back to what'll be our regular scheduled programming, which will be the news coming up here shortly. So let's back out real quick, and we'll take a look at what's happening across the rest of the Panhandle as we still have some scattered showers that are occurring in other locations right now, especially as you look up toward the tri-state. This is all a part of the morning batch of rains that are moving their way up into Georgia. Once we get done with this kind of first batch of rain, we'll actually start to see our next batch take shape along the cold front itself back towards the west. And we can already see some of that inklings taking place right now back toward Santa Rosa and Escambia counties, just over toward Pensacola. This is going to be kind of a late afternoon or evening round of rain for us as we get into the forecast for the second half of the day here for today. But down across Bay County is where we're still watching for the potential of maybe some gusty winds on 22. It's 12:15 is the expiration date on this, and we are nearing that time frame here, folks. So I would go ahead and say that as long as you're outside of Highway 22 right now, things are going to be okay for you. Just some benign showers and not even some rumbles of thunder occurring in our atmosphere here with these storm cells, but we have seen some gusty winds in association with them as they've worked their way further off towards the northeast here for this morning. We'll have another shot at getting some showers and thunderstorms back in the forecast for us as we go into the latter portion of the day and into the evening, and we're going to cover those as the news is going to get going right now. But it is 12:15. They have allowed that tornado warning to expire. Again, 22, just some heavy rains right now and maybe some gusty winds as storm cell will continue to work its way off to the northeast. We'll continue to monitor it, but it is looking rather benign at this hour. We'll be back here in just a couple minutes. Stay with us.